One of the more novel workflows we have available to us with the Conveyor plugin is how we're able to translate meshes from the Rhino environment into Revit. Typically what you do in order to bring a mesh into Revit is to translate it through some intermediary file format like DWG or DXF. This is an example of a mesh where it has a pretty high poly count. If I go into shaded mode, we can see the polygons of the mesh. So there is some complexity to this. And what you would typically do is you would export this as a DWG and then import it into Revit. And what the result of that usually looks like is something like this. We're able to see all of the polygons that's being brought in via the mesh. And there's not much control we can have over the visibility. So if you're hoping to use a mesh like this in documentation, you're kind of stuck with all of this wiring, which is typically not very desirable from a documentation perspective in the world of architecture. With Conveyor, we're hoping to change the game a little bit. Conveyor exposes a new translation workflow that parses meshes and creates a much cleaner import for them so they can be used for background material. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a Conveyor workflow. I'm going to do a Conveyor setup and activate the layering structure and the Conveyor plugin. I'm going to select my mesh. I'm going to assign it to the meshes category, and I'm going to make this generic models. So now we've assigned this to a proper Conveyor category and layer. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to go back over into Revit. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this mesh out of the way a bit. I'm just going to move it over here so I still have it, and we can maybe do some comparisons. Looks like I need to unpin it first, of course. So move that over, like so. And now I'm going to activate the Conveyor command under Proving Ground tab. I'm going to open the Rhino Conveyor tools, dock those accordingly, and I'm going to navigate to my mesh example. And we're going to see that we have this ability to import the mesh. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit load Rhino objects. One object is going to be loaded, and it's going to go through the process of parsing the mesh, and it's going to bring the mesh in as a family. And what you'll notice right out of the gate with this mesh is that the mesh itself is going to have a pretty clean representation. The edges of the mesh where you have creases are going to be visible, but all the intermediary polygons that you see in this DWG import are gone, which makes this very useful as a kind of a documentation background. If I go to shaded mode, we can see the polygons are still there. This is a mesh that has not changed, but the edges themselves are no longer visible. What we've also found to be pretty novel about this workflow and this particular type of mesh is how well they cut. They're pretty lightweight representations as we've brought them in. And if I I'll go back to hidden line mode here, and I'll just activate the section box command. And I'll have cut it across, and you can see that it does create a pretty clean cut, and you can see that we are highlighting and filling in those areas that are basically would be pochade at that section cut that I'm doing in the section plane. I'll even go to level 1 here, and we can kind of see what the resultant condition is here with this imported mesh that I'm simply inserted using the import CAD command. We can still see all the mesh wires. You'll also note that it's not cutting in this plan view. This mesh that I've brought in through the family and did a bit of post-processing on using Conveyor is coming in cleanly, and it is also cutting, so we're getting a nice cut line at where this would exist in plan. So this can become a really powerful device for bringing in meshes and actually letting you use meshes in a documentation and building information workflow that was previously unavailable without the Conveyor plugin.